Hello. Last time we talked about this idea of whether or not your thoughts actually shape your reality. And I want to dig into that a little bit more, looking at what different authors have said about the principles of success and wealth. What we see in multiple philosophy and success books is this idea that success and wealth are not secrets. It's not a secret how to obtain success and wealth. There's an actual science behind it. So I want to start off just by saying wealth and gaining success is not some complicated, mysterious thing. I think what's happened is people have made it complicated and tried to make it confusing, possibly so that specific people can stay wealthy while other people struggle. But the concepts are very simple and clean, and we're going to dive into those today. I'll be referencing a number of different books that I have really used over the past couple of years to help me gain success and wealth. But I'm going to be referencing topics in those, and I really encourage you when I mention certain books, if you haven't read them, go out and read them for yourself. I will always be coming back to them, and I'll let you know whenever I'm talking about a specific author or book. But please feel free to go out and read these books. And then if you have questions, let me know, because these concepts are throughout all of these different books that I mentioned, but different authors say it different ways. And it just takes once reading something to get it to stick in for you. But let's just from the jump start about talking about this idea of wealth and success. Success is not random. And it's not reserved for people who are more charming or loud or lucky. We hear this a lot. Well, that person just got lucky. The idea that we see throughout all this literature is that success is more about working from universal laws. And that's why I really like this idea. Being a former prosecutor, I like digging into the law, figuring out what the law says about certain things. And so this idea of success being based in law, when I say based in law, I mean based in universal law or universal principles. And the idea is once you learn how to work with this law, then you stop chasing results and you start creating the life that you want. When I say chasing results, I mean chasing that external thing, saying, well, I want more money, I want to have more success in my career, and you're always going after and chasing that result rather than looking at it from the perspective of how do I create this result, being the career, the money, the finances, whatever. So when we look at it from the perspective of laws, think about a law that we can all get behind, the law of gravity. Gravity does not care if you believe in it or not. It is a law that exists. It's a universal principle. You are stuck to this earth. If you are at the top of a skyscraper and you walk off, even if you don't believe in gravity, you're still going to fall to it's the skyscraper fall to your death. But gravity is the law. It doesn't care if you believe in it. It doesn't care if you're thinking about it. It is at work all the time. My mentor once said that it doesn't matter if you're the sweetest little old lady, you're still going to be subject to the laws of gravity. So if you, like I said, step off a skyscraper, you could be the nicest person in the world. You could be the most wonderful human being that exists, but the law is still going to work regardless of who you are or what you believe. That's the idea behind these laws of success. These laws are at work, and these laws are working throughout all of the universe, all of the time, whether or not you believe in them or know about them. So just as I'm talking through these laws, think about them as you would gravity. Just because we don't constantly go around thinking gravity's holding me to the earth right now, it doesn't mean that gravity isn't holding you to the earth. It means that gravity is doing its job. You're just not consciously thinking about it. So let's talk about this idea of the universal law of how to gain success. And there are a couple of different laws, but let's start first with this idea of people thinking that wealth or success only comes to the lucky ones. I'll hear this a lot where people will say, well, that person just had the right connections, or they started out with money because they had a trust fund or their family was rich, or that person just got really lucky. Now, yes, some people do get lucky. Some people do start off rich. Some people do have connections, but that's not the reason that people succeed. I'm sure you can think about plenty of people you've known that started off really well off in life. They either had a trust fund or they got lucky, and then they blew it all. And they ended up just as poor as if they hadn't had it to begin with. So the idea is not that it involves luck or specific circumstances. In fact, the author Wallace Wattles in The Science of Getting Rich said that success is the result of doing things in a certain way. And when he said certain way, what he meant is doing them according to the law. And when he said according to the law, it's according to the laws of the universe. So putting that in a different way, a more modern terminology, I suppose, if he was speaking today on this podcast, he would say success is the result of doing things by universal law. The other thing that we can go back to is being conscious of those universal laws. So again, just like gravity exists, whether we're thinking about it or are conscious of it or not, the principles that govern success, the universal laws, exist whether you're conscious of them or not. My goal and my hope for those listening to this podcast is that this will start to illuminate those laws and make you more conscious of them so that you can start exercising the patterns needed within the laws to achieve that success and that wealth that you're looking for. And success, when I say success and wealth, I use them interchangeably, but success can be anything. Success can be success in relationships. It could be getting a promotion. It could be having more money. It could be achieving a certain weight loss or health goal. Success comes in many shapes and forms, but the universal laws all govern in the same way towards that success. Napoleon Hill, another author that I really like, he wrote the book Think and Grow Rich, said that success comes to those who become success conscious. In other words, success comes to those who understand the universal laws that are at work and use those laws consciously to become successful. What he really espoused in his book was the idea that your internal belief combined with whatever method of creation you have, so whatever job or whatever company you use, that is what actually results in the creation of success. So throughout all of these different texts and ideas, there's this underlying idea that if you do not have success, again, that's not a result of luck. And this is where it can be a little hard hitting. And some people do not like confronting this idea. But the truth is, and it's kind of harsh the way it sounds, I don't mean it to be negative, but the truth is if you're not successful, it's no one's fault but your own. And I know I may get a lot of backlash from that, but stick with me through this. What happens when people don't have the success that they want, or they're not seeing success show up in their life, is because they're operating from a conditioned pattern. You're operating from whatever pattern got you to where you are. So if you're currently, right now, not experiencing success, that is because the results that you're seeing right now are a direct result of past actions, behaviors, and beliefs. So whatever it was that you were thinking in the past got you to where you are now. So thinking about it logically, if you want to be somewhere different than you are right now, you can't get somewhere different thinking in the same way that got you here. So in other words, the actions that you took, the beliefs that you had, the habits that you engaged in that got you to the point that you're at right now will not get you to any other point other than what you have right now. So this is how people stay in that loop. If you just keep acting the same way over and over, you're going to keep experiencing the same results. It was Albert Einstein who said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. That's what we end up doing is we get stuck in this daily grind and we keep wishing and hoping for success, but nothing actually changes other than maybe coming up with a new dream or idea of what success is. Our habits don't change. Our mindset doesn't change. Our internal beliefs don't change. So we're engaging in insane behavior. If you take what Einstein said, literally, where we're doing the same thing over and over, we're working the same job, waking up in the same way, engaging in the same habits, yet we're expecting some other result to show up in our lives. That is the definition of insanity. That is a habitual pattern that got us to where we are. It will not get us to any place different. We have to change something. And Raymond Holliwell, an author that I really like, who wrote the book Working with the Law of Success, the laws of the universe, said that the law of thinking is the foundation of all other laws. So I've been talking with you here about the universal laws and what that means. And what Holliwell proposes is that the number one law that exists, now there are multiple laws of the universe, but the number one law that exists as it relates to success is the law of thinking. And this goes back to what we were talking about on the last episode, this idea that your thoughts create reality. What he says in his book, Working with the Law, is if your thinking violates the law, then your results are going to reflect that violation. So no matter how hard you try for success, if your underlying thoughts are thinking there's no way I'm actually going to be able to achieve this, you're never going to actually achieve what you want to achieve, because your thinking is the first cause that sets results in motion. Now, again, this sounds kind of esoteric and woo-woo, but this has been backed by science and by psychological research. One psychological study that stands out in this particular area was a study done by Dr. Carol Dweck. First of all, she wrote a fantastic book as well. Her book is called Mindset. If you haven't read it yet, please do, especially if you have children. It's absolutely a wonderful read. But what she really did in her study, specifically the study that she did in 2006, is she did a deep dive into the idea of fixed versus growth mindset. Now, she believed and hypothesized and then discovered from her research that there are really two types of mindsets that a person can adopt, either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is one where you believe that everyone is born with innate talents. Intelligence is something you're born with. It's your IQ score. You can't change it. Everyone has specific abilities, and everything is kind of a static trait. You either have it or you don't. And that kind of lines up with this idea that people have about success. You're either lucky and you have it, or you're unlucky and you're not as rich as you want. You're just struggling day to day. That's what Carol Dweck called a fixed mindset. The opposite of that is a growth mindset. And that's the belief that skills and intelligence can be developed through conscious effort, learning, and strategy. So what Dr. Dweck set out to do was to prove that fixed mindset isn't necessarily a thing, that growth mindset can actually bring about success in people. What she did was she worked through an elementary school, and she did a study where she randomly selected a group of kids, and kids were either praised for being smart, like innately smart from that fixed mindset, or they were praised for their hard work or the growth mindset. And here's what happened. The kids who were told that they were smart, just innately smart, started playing it safe on certain tasks. They had options of choosing different tasks. They would choose the easier task versus the harder task. They would avoid challenges, and they tended to start breaking down emotionally when things got hard, because they couldn't understand why they weren't getting it, because they thought they were supposed to be smart, because that's what they were told. They were innately smart. And so if they weren't able to accomplish something, they just broke down and didn't keep trying, because they thought, well, I must not be smart enough to do this thing. Then they looked at the people or the children who were praised for effort, the ones that said, oh, you did such a good job figuring that out. You worked so hard to accomplish this. Instead of saying, oh, you're so smart, the idea was to say, oh, you worked so hard. What a great job you did. They were praised for their effort. Those children actually ended up outperforming the, quote, naturally smart kids. They actually, when they were given tasks, leaned into harder tasks. They got better. And they far surpassed what the naturally smart kids could do. This was done in a number of different experiments. In one experiment, it was done at a very low-performing school, but they started being praised for their work ethic, and then their test results shot way up. The idea here was that Dr. Dweck proved that success was learnable. It's not that you have a fixed amount of intelligence or a fixed amount of success available to you. Success is not a personality trait. It's not a natural thing that someone is born with. It can be developed. That's the idea behind growth mindset. And bringing this back to the philosophical thinkers and the success teachers, that's what Wallace Wattles was saying all the way back in 1910, when he said that success comes from doing things in a certain way. In other words, working towards success in the right way. You don't have to be lucky. You just have to understand the universal principles and work through that process in order to achieve success. Said another way, universal laws don't care about innate talent. They don't care about whether or not you're born with a trust fund. They care about whether or not you're operating within the law. Going back to that example of gravity, gravity doesn't care if you are innately born into a certain area or not. Gravity is going to keep you grounded to the ground no matter what. It doesn't care what you believe. It doesn't care what you think about it. It just works the way it's supposed to work. Now, in talking about this growth mindset, I don't want this to be confused with the idea of hard work and just work harder. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say work within the construct of the laws of success and universal laws. Working harder without any kind of framework is not the way to accomplish success or to gain wealth. I think a lot of people are stuck in this, quote, hustle culture. And they think that, well, if I just work harder, if I just push more, if I just do more, then I'll get there. But you can work yourself to the bone and still stay broke. I've seen plenty of people do this because it's less about the effort. It's not that you don't need to spend effort. I'm not saying you sit around, like I said, and vibrate all day. It's not about that. It's not about just sitting there and wishing things come into existence. You still need to put forth effort, but you need to make sure it's structured and aligned effort, not just working and being busy to be busy. Neville Goddard is another author that I really like. He wrote a book called The Feeling is the Secret, and he said it best. He said, to be transformed, the whole basis of your thought must change. So it's not the idea that you have to work hard in order to get success. It's that you need to work consistently in a way that is going to bring you closer to success using those universal principles. There's this idea that we have that if we just work harder, we'll gain, this elusive, successful future. But there's also an idea that people think that when I reach this point, I'll be happy. And that's not actually the case. Modern research has shown us that people actually overestimate how much future success that comes from external effort is going to affect their happiness. And they tend to underestimate the role of belief or vision in their own happiness. So yes, while this podcast and everything I talk about is always trying to help you find success, build wealth, whatever it is that you're wanting, the ultimate goal, I'm assuming, behind someone wanting to build wealth or to find success is to achieve happiness. So it's really important to note that happiness actually is more important than that success, because the success won't bring happiness. Now, if you are happy, you will more likely gain success and be successful. But going after something just because you think it's going to make you happy is the wrong reason to go after something. And I want to bring up this study that was done by a Harvard psychologist. His name is Daniel Gilbert. And he specifically was looking at what's called effective forecasting. In other words, looking at whether or not people could actually predict with accuracy the level of happiness they would have at a future event, and whether or not they were accurate in that. So, put in plain English, he was researching this idea where people say, well, if I could have that, then I'll be happy. He was researching whether that's true or not. And what he found out is it really isn't true. And here's what they did. So one of the studies they did was called the quote unquote big event study. And this was looking at things that were major events in someone's life. So what they did is Dr. Gilbert and the associated researchers who were working with him, I think the other guy's name was Wilson, they asked participants to predict how they would feel after a significant life event, like getting rejected from a dream job or not getting into grad school or experiencing some kind of breakup with a significant other, or positively, whether they'd be happy receiving a promotion or achieving a long-term goal. So they asked the participants to rate how they would feel and what they would feel as far as their level of happiness or lack of happiness if one of these major events happened. Then they followed up with the people after an event happened in their life that was similar to what they had predicted. So like if they said, well, how do you think you'd feel after a romantic breakup? Then once someone actually did experience a breakup, they'd follow back up with them and say, how do you actually feel now? So what they were looking to do is they were looking to compare the predicted emotional response of the participants. In other words, how good they felt or how bad they felt or how they felt they would feel versus their actual emotional response. So what did they predict would be their feeling versus what was actually their feeling when this event happened? And what the researchers found is that people consistently overestimated both the intensity and the duration of their emotional reaction. Now, why is that important? What that means is people, for example, if someone said, well, if I get this promotion, I'll be this level of happiness. What the study showed is that not only were they not as happy as they thought they would be, but they weren't as happy for as long as they thought they would be. Another example is one of the students was asked, what happens if you don't get into this prestigious program you've applied for? And they predicted that they would be devastated for months over it. But there was a point in time when they didn't get accepted into a program they applied for, and the researchers checked back with them a month later, not months down the road, and the person had already emotionally recovered and was back in pursuit of their goals. So that was one study that they did. Another study that talked about this was actually done by Dr. Brickman back in 1978. Gilbert cited this in his research, and the study was called the Lottery and the Paraplegic Study. So what they did is they researched both recent lottery winners and people who had recently become paraplegics. In other words, people who had recently suffered life-altering, what seems to be negative events in their lives. And then they talked to them during the recent event. So either they recently won the lottery or they recently experienced becoming a paraplegic. And then the researchers came back after a year and talked to both groups again to look at their overall levels of happiness. And what's interesting is the levels of happiness didn't change. So you have the recent lottery winners who they rated their level of happiness right after winning the lottery. And then you have a year later what their level of happiness is. And there wasn't any real difference. Same thing with the paraplegics. They recently had become paraplegics. Their happiness wasn't very different. And what this study showed was that the external circumstances, even huge life-altering ones like winning the lottery, which would normally be thought of as positive, and becoming a paraplegic, which would normally be thought of as negative, had less of an impact on long-term fulfillment than the researchers imagined, or that we would normally imagine. What this showed is that people's minds adapt. They adapt to the circumstances. And what the study specifically showed is that it's our mental framework that determines our trajectory or our happiness level. In other words, it's not so much the goal that you put out there that makes you happy. It's how you approach the goal and what you believe in the process of achieving the goal that matters more for your happiness. So to summarize this, basically, we're bad at predicting what will make us happy or successful because we forget how powerful our internal adaptation system is. We overestimate how much circumstances matter to us, and we underestimate how much our beliefs and our inner world shape the outer outcome that we see, which ties in with what we've been talking about during this episode and the last episode, which is that the outer circumstances, the outer results that we experience are really more of an after effect or a byproduct of our own internal belief. So it's really not about the outside circumstance. It's more about what's going on inside that predicts your happiness and ultimately that predicts your success. So bringing this back to the idea of more work, you don't need to work harder to achieve this certain success level. You need to do it in the right way, and the right way entails approaching things from this belief in what you're doing and already being happy in the moment now, as opposed to waiting for this future goalpost to make you happy. That will actually help you achieve the success you want, rather than waiting for the end result, working hard. And by working hard, I mean just grinding, waiting to be happy until that point. Now, when we're looking at this idea of universal laws dictating success and how it works, there's a specific structure to how we approach success. There's a way to think, a way to move, a way to speak, a way to move forward. And Thomas Troward called it the law of cause and effect. He said it's the universal law of mind. So the exact quote from his Edinburgh lectures was, "The law of cause and effect is the universal law of mind." What he means here is the cause is the belief, the underlying idea, the intention, and the effect is the outer result that shows up. So wealth, opportunities, relationships, whatever outcome. So this idea of your underlying belief or intention is showing up in this effect. It's all controlled by this idea of the mind. So it means that your results aren't random. They're the visible output of what's going on internally. So put another way, your results are the visible effect of an invisible cause, which is your thinking or your belief or your structure. This isn't to say that success is magic or woo-woo. It's a universal law that how you think affects what you experience and what you become. Again, think about it like gravity. You're not just floating to the ceiling when you totally forget about gravity. It's not like, oh, I have to think about gravity all the time to keep myself grounded. Gravity is always working, whether you're aware of it or not. Same thing happens with your mind and this idea of cause and effect. Just because you're not thinking about the effects of what you're thinking about, in other words, if you're in a bad mood and you're just like fuming and just sitting in that bad mood, you're not thinking, oh, I wonder what this bad mood is causing, doesn't mean that it's not causing something externally. The law is still working. It's still in effect, even if you're not thinking about it. This is what is the fundamental underlying principle of success, that our thoughts create our reality. So when you are cognizant of this and you're conscious of the law always at work, you can be more conscious about what you're doing, how you're doing it, what you're thinking, how you're thinking about what you're doing, and make sure you're putting in all of your effort and intention into successful thoughts, happy thoughts, and moving forward, and not letting yourself get just dragged down into this negative thinking and negative habits and patterns that will not get you the successful results that you're wanting. Another way to put this, Wallace Wattles said this in The Science of Getting Rich. He said, it's not possible to remain poor once you become rich in thought. In other words, once you learn to think in a certain way, once you begin to think successfully, once you begin to act as if you're already successful, then you become successful. Now, I'll talk about this a little bit more in the next episode, but essentially what we're talking about here is this idea of living from the result you already want. Benjamin Hardy has a fantastic book that came out about this called Be Your Future Self Now. And he's really focused on this idea that instead of waiting until you reach this magical end goal, think from the perspective of, I am becoming the kind of person who achieves this or does this or whatever. So coming from this outcome-based perspective rather than saying, once I am this way, I will do this thing. One of the examples he gives in one of the first chapters of his book is he was coming home and he was really tired from his day and he was about to pull into his drive. And he took a minute to think, okay, if my future self, 20 years in the future, were coming home, how would he look at this moment? Would he be tired? Would he be angry? Would he be frustrated? Or would he just be so excited to spend 5 more minutes with his 3-year-old daughter? And he realized 20 years from now, he's going to wish he could go back and have more time with his daughter when she was 3. And that made him be more present and be more happy in the moment and choose a different outcome just from the way his thoughts changed. Again, it's a phenomenal book. You need to go back and read it. It's Benjamin Hardy, Be Your Future Self Now. But this episode's going a little bit long. The idea I want to convey to you here is this idea of wealth being lucky or success being something that only certain people achieve, or that you have to just grind to reach a certain goal and then you'll be happy. That's crap. You don't need to keep chasing happiness. You don't need to start or stop. You need to stop going from this perspective of do more without stopping to think about what you're actually doing internally, because the internal gain is what matters more than anything. Yes, you still need to work. Yes, you still need to do things to further your goals. But the most important thing is to whether or not you're going to achieve success is how you're thinking internally. So once you shift from this kind of scattered action to doing this and being very, very active without any conscious thought behind it, and you switch more to a structured approach where you're getting your thoughts in line first, and then you're taking action from this position of already being happy, already being successful, then your results inevitably are going to show up as success, wealth, whatever it is that you're going towards. This isn't magical thinking. This is a universal principle. This is a law. This means that you have the power to control your outcome. Just like you don't have to think about gravity all the time. You don't have to think about this law all the time. But for a moment, I really encourage you, start looking at your thoughts and how you're approaching life, because that is going to show you exactly what's going on in your life to create these results right now. And then when you start changing your inner dialogue, changing your inner thoughts, then you'll start seeing success show up in your life in the ways that you want it to. Again, we don't want to operate under this principle of insanity that Einstein talked about. We don't want to do the same thing over and over expecting different results. Please take this podcast episode as your challenge to change your results by changing your behavior and your inner thoughts, because that is what will the needle forward in your success journey. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode of beyond a reasonable doubt.